Title: The Full Story of Alexander Graham Bell, the Man Who Connected the World. Welcome to this inspiring English story, The Full Story of Alexander Graham Bell, the Man Who Connected the World. In this story, you will travel back to the 19th century and discover how a young boy with a deep curiosity about sound changed human communication forever. You will see how passion, hard work, and love for others can lead to incredible inventions. This story is written in clear, slow, and natural English, perfect for learners who want to improve listening, vocabulary, and comprehension while learning about one of history's greatest inventors. So, relax, listen carefully, and let the story of Alexander Graham Bell inspire you to dream, explore, and create. Now, let's begin our journey. Alexander Graham Bell was born on March 3, 1847, in Edinburgh, Scotland. Edinburgh was a beautiful city, full of history, learning, and invention. The streets were narrow and old, and the air often smelled of rain and coal. But inside the Bell home, there was always warmth, laughter, and curiosity. Alexander was the second of 3 sons. From a young age, everyone noticed that he was different. He was not only intelligent but also deeply curious about everything around him. When other children played games, Alexander often sat quietly, asking questions about how things worked. His father, Alexander Melville Bell, was a teacher of speech and pronunciation. He helped people learn how to speak clearly, especially those who had speech difficulties. His mother, Eliza Gray Simons Bell, was a kind and gentle woman who loved art and music. But there was one challenge: she was almost completely deaf. Young Alexander loved his mother deeply. He wanted to talk to her and make her smile. Because she could not hear, he found creative ways to communicate. He would press his lips close to her forehead so she could feel the vibration of his voice. Sometimes, he wrote notes or used hand signs. He even learned to use different tones and gestures to express himself. Through this, Alexander discovered something special: sound was not just what we hear, but also what we feel. He began to see sound as something mysterious and powerful. At the age of 10, Alexander's curiosity grew even stronger. He started to build things from whatever he could find: wood, wires, metal, even parts of broken toys. He loved solving problems. One day, when he was only 12 years old, he visited a small flour mill near his house. He saw workers removing grain husks by hand. It was slow, hard work. Most boys might just watch and leave, but Alexander thought differently. He wanted to help. He went home, thought for hours, and then built a simple machine using paddles and brushes that could automatically separate the husks from the grain. The machine worked perfectly. The mill owner was amazed and rewarded him. That was Alexander's first invention. It showed his creativity and his desire to make life easier for others. His family noticed his growing passion for discovery. His father encouraged him to study and read. His grandfather, who lived in London, was also proud of him. The older Bell was a wise man who loved language and expression. When Alexander visited him, they spent hours talking about sound, speech, and learning. But life was not always easy for the Bell family. Alexander had 2 brothers, Melville and Edward, and both were bright and full of promise. Sadly, both fell ill with tuberculosis, a serious disease that had no cure at that time. Their sickness brought deep sadness to the family. The long Scottish winters made the boys weaker. After the loss of his brothers, Alexander's parents decided they needed a change. They hoped that moving to a new country with cleaner air might save their only remaining son. In 1870, when Alexander was 23 years old, the Bell family left Scotland and moved to Canada. It was a big decision and a difficult journey. They left behind friends, memories, and their familiar home. When the ship finally reached Brantford, Ontario, they were amazed by the vast open land, fresh air, and quiet countryside. Canada was very different from the crowded streets of Edinburgh. For Alexander, it felt like a new beginning. In Brantford, he set up a small workshop behind their home. He loved to spend long hours there, surrounded by tools, wires, and notebooks filled with sketches. Nature also inspired him. the songs of birds, the wind in the trees, the sound of water running over stones. He listened carefully to everything, always trying to understand how sound traveled. His dream grew clearer. He wanted to help people hear and communicate better. His mother's deafness was never far from his mind. He began to think, if sound can travel through air, could it also travel through something else, like a wire? He didn't have the answer yet, but he had the question, and that was enough to keep him working. Alexander also began teaching children in the small town. He was kind, patient, and full of energy. He believed that everyone could learn if they were given the right help. His students loved him, and adults admired his creativity. Sometimes, after teaching, he would walk home at sunset, thinking about how amazing it would be if people could talk to each other from far away. In his imagination, he could already hear voices crossing great distances, carried by invisible waves. Every new discovery he made brought him one step closer to his dream. But there was still much he didn't know. He needed more knowledge, more experience, and perhaps, more help. Still, one thing was certain. The boy who had once built a simple machine to help mill workers had grown into a young man determined to change the world. He didn't yet know how, but his heart told him why: to make life better, to bring people closer, and to give sound to those who lived in silence. That purpose guided him every day. And in the quiet of his small workshop, surrounded by the gentle sounds of the Canadian countryside, the dream of the telephone was beginning to take shape. After settling in Canada, Alexander Graham Bell's curiosity only grew stronger. The quiet countryside around Brantford, Ontario gave him time to think, dream, and experiment. He often walked along the Grand River, listening carefully to the sounds of nature, the rustling leaves, the singing birds, the flow of water. To him, sound was not just a noise. It was life itself. He spent many hours in his workshop behind the house. There, he built small models and tested ideas about how sound traveled. Sometimes, he stretched long wires between different rooms or trees to see how vibrations moved through them. His neighbors thought he was a little strange, but Alexander didn't mind. He was lost in his experiments. His biggest dream was still the same: to help people hear and communicate better. His mother's deafness had shaped his heart and mind. He wanted to find ways for people who could not hear to still connect with others. In 1871, something important happened. Bell received an invitation to move to the United States to teach at a school for the deaf in Boston, Massachusetts. At that time, Bell was 24 years old. He packed his notebooks, a few tools, and great excitement for a new adventure. Boston was a busy and modern city. When Alexander arrived, he was amazed by the tall buildings, gas lamps, and the constant sound of horses and people. Life there was faster than in Canada or Scotland. But what mattered most to him were his students. He began teaching at the Boston School for the Deaf, where he developed new methods of teaching speech. His goal was not only to help students use sign language, but also to help them learn how to speak with their voices. His approach was gentle and creative. He often touched his throat to show how sound was made, or placed a student's hand on his cheek to help them feel vibrations. His patience made him beloved by his students. Among his pupils was a young girl named Mabel Hubbard. She was intelligent, graceful, and curious. Mabel had lost her hearing after an illness when she was very young. Despite her silence, she was full of life. Bell admired her strength and determination. Over time, a quiet friendship began to grow between them. But Bell's mind was still filled with experiments. During his free hours, often late into the night, he worked on another dream: the idea of sending sound through electricity. At that time, the telegraph was already a popular invention. It could send short messages using dots and dashes. But Bell wondered, if we can send simple signals, why not the human voice itself? Many people thought the idea was impossible. Even scientists told him that the human voice was too complex to travel through wires. But Bell refused to give up. He believed that every sound was simply a wave, and waves could be carried by electricity, if only he could find the right method. Still, Bell knew he needed help. He was not an engineer, and his electrical knowledge was limited. That's when he met Thomas Watson, a young and talented electrician. Watson was clever with machines and understood how to build circuits and devices. Bell had the vision, Watson had the technical skill. The two men quickly became close friends. They worked side by side, surrounded by tangled wires, magnets, batteries, and strange metal parts. Their workshop was small, messy, and full of noise, but to them, it was a world of magic and discovery. Many nights, they forgot to eat or sleep. They tested every idea Bell had, no matter how crazy it sounded. Sometimes sparks flew, sometimes things caught fire. But every failure brought them closer to success. Bell also faced another challenge, money. His experiments were expensive, and he often struggled to pay for equipment. Luckily, Mabel's father, Gardner Hubbard, believed in Bell's ideas and decided to support him financially. Hubbard became his investor and his mentor. Meanwhile, Bell continued teaching and inspiring his students. Even when he was tired from long nights of work, he never lost his kindness or energy in the classroom. His students were his motivation. One evening, while walking home, he looked up at the stars and thought, someday, people will speak to each other across great distances. The sound of their voices will travel faster than the wind. It was a dream bigger than anyone could imagine in the 1870s. But that dream kept his heart alive. Over the next few years, Bell and Watson made many experiments. They built different versions of a device that could change sound waves into electrical signals and then back into sound. Sometimes, they could hear faint noises through the wires, a click, a hum, or even a few tones, but never a clear voice. Still, Bell was full of hope. "We are close," he would say to Watson. "I can feel it." Mabel continued to visit his laboratory and encouraged him. She believed in him even when others laughed at his ideas. Her quiet faith gave him strength. Boston society began to hear about the young teacher who was trying to make a talking telegraph. Some called him a genius. Others thought he was foolish. But Bell didn't care what people thought. His focus never changed. In 1875, after many sleepless nights, Bell began to see real progress. He discovered that when a thin metal plate vibrated near an electromagnet, the vibration created a change in the electric current. That meant sound could be turned into electricity, and electricity could carry sound. It was a small discovery, but for Bell, it was a light in the dark. He was getting closer to the answer. As spring came to Boston, Bell and Watson prepared for one of their biggest experiments yet, an experiment that would change the world forever. Neither of them knew it yet, but they were only days away from hearing the first human voice ever transmitted through a wire. It was the winter of 1875 in Boston. Alexander Graham Bell and Thomas Watson had been working for months without rest. Their small laboratory smelled of metal, oil, and electricity. Wires ran across the tables like vines. Tools were scattered everywhere. Every day, Bell and Watson tested new ideas. Some days, they thought they were close to success. Other days, everything seemed to fail. Still, Bell refused to give up. He often said to Watson, "We are so near, Thomas. I can feel it. One day, voices will fly through these wires." Watson would smile and nod. "Then let's keep trying, Mr. Bell." That winter, they worked through cold nights, their hands stiff from the chill. They were tired, hungry, and often broke, but they shared the same dream, to make a machine that could carry the human voice. Bell's design was based on a simple idea: when people speak, their voices create vibrations in the air. If those vibrations could be turned into an electrical signal, the signal might travel through a wire. Then, at the other end, it could turn back into sound again. It was a beautiful theory, but no one had ever made it work. One afternoon, in March 1876, the two men were preparing for another test. Bell was in one room, and Watson was in the next. They were connected by wires running through the wall. On Bell's table stood a small device made of wood, metal, and acid-filled batteries. It looked simple, but it carried years of dreams and failures. As Bell leaned over his experiment, something unexpected happened. He accidentally spilled acid from one of the batteries onto his clothes. The liquid began to burn his skin. Without thinking, he shouted, "Mr. Watson, come here. I want to see you." In the next room, Watson suddenly heard a sound through the wire, a voice. Not a click, not a hum, but real, clear words. He froze in disbelief. Then, his heart started pounding. He ran into Bell's room, shouting, "Mr. Bell, I heard you. I heard your voice through the wire." Bell looked up, astonished. For a moment, both men stood silently, realizing what had just happened. For the first time in human history, speech had traveled through electricity. The world had just changed forever. Watson helped clean the spilled acid, but they could hardly think of anything except what they had heard. They tested again, and again, Watson could hear Bell's voice through the wire. It worked. The telephone had been born. That day, March 10, 1876, became one of the most important dates in history. Bell immediately wrote in his notebook, "I then shouted into the transmitter, 'Mr. Watson, come here, I want to see you.' He came and declared that he had heard and understood what I said." After years of patience, struggle, and failure, success had finally come, almost by accident. Over the next few weeks, Bell and Watson continued to improve the device. They made stronger wires, better transmitters, and clearer receivers. Each new test brought cleaner sound. Soon, they were ready to show the invention to the world. In June 1876, they traveled to Philadelphia to attend the Centennial Exhibition, a huge World's Fair celebrating the 100th birthday of the United States. Scientists, inventors, and curious visitors came from everywhere to see the latest inventions, steam engines, electric lights, typewriters, and more. Bell was nervous. His telephone looked strange and simple compared to the powerful machines around it. But when it was his turn to demonstrate, something magical happened. He stood before the judges, holding his small wooden device, and spoke softly into it. On the other side of the hall, Watson listened through the receiver, and the judges heard his reply, carried through a wire. The audience gasped. They could hardly believe it. They had just witnessed the first conversation through a telephone. One of the judges, the famous scientist Dom Pedro II, the Emperor of Brazil, was amazed. He exclaimed, "My God, it talks." Everyone in the room applauded. The telephone became the most exciting invention at the fair. Newspapers quickly wrote about Alexander Graham Bell's talking machine. Soon after, Bell received 2 patents for his invention. The news spread around the world. People everywhere wanted to see and hear this new miracle of communication. Bell's life changed almost overnight. Scientists wanted to meet him. Investors wanted to buy his idea. Letters arrived daily, asking about his strange talking device. Still, Bell remained humble. He was not only proud of the invention, but also grateful for the people who helped him, Thomas Watson, his loyal friend, and Mabel Hubbard, who had always believed in him. Later that same year, in July 1877, Alexander married Mabel Hubbard. Their love story was gentle and full of respect. Mabel's belief in Bell had never wavered, even when everyone else doubted him. She had supported his dream from the beginning. Together, they began a new chapter of their lives, filled with excitement and hope. But Bell's invention was still just beginning its journey. The first telephones were difficult to use, and the sound was often weak. People had to shout into them, and wires could only connect 2 points. Even so, people were fascinated. The idea that you could talk to someone miles away seemed almost like magic. Businessmen saw the potential immediately. They imagined telephones in offices, hotels, and homes. Bell and his partners quickly formed the Bell Telephone Company to produce and sell telephones. At first, only a few people could afford them. The first customers were businesses and wealthy families. But as the years passed, the technology improved, and more people began to use it. Still, Bell never forgot what had started it all, his desire to help people communicate. He often said, "The great advantage of the telephone is that it brings people together." The world was now more connected than ever before. From a small, messy workshop in Boston, Alexander Graham Bell had created something that would forever change the way humans lived, worked, and loved. His voice, and the voice of his friend Watson, had opened the door to a new age of communication. And deep down, Bell knew this was only the beginning. After Alexander Graham Bell's invention of the telephone, the world began to change, but not all at once. At first, only a few people truly understood how powerful this new invention could be. The telephone was a strange, almost magical device. Some people thought it was a toy. Others believed it was impossible for voices to travel through wires. But soon, curiosity spread like fire. People who had never spoken to someone far away were amazed the first time they picked up a telephone and heard another human voice miles away. They laughed, shouted, and even cried with surprise. It was as if a miracle had entered their homes. In 1877, Bell and his partners created the Bell Telephone Company. They began producing telephones and building the first telephone lines. The very first phone lines were short, just between two nearby offices or homes, but for the people of that time, it felt like magic. The sound was often unclear. Voices crackled, and sometimes the connection was lost. But it didn't matter. The idea itself, that people could speak instantly across distance, was extraordinary. Soon, telephone wires began to appear across the cities of Boston, New York, and Philadelphia. Wooden poles lined the streets, carrying long wires overhead. People would stop and stare, wondering how invisible voices could move through them. The first telephone exchanges were simple rooms filled with young women who worked as operators. They sat at large switchboards, connecting one person's call to another by hand. When someone lifted their receiver, an operator would say politely, "Number, please?" The world was beginning to talk in a new way. But with success came problems too. Other inventors began to claim that they had created the telephone before Bell. There were lawsuits, arguments, and public debates. Some said Bell had stolen the idea. Others said the patent was unfair. For Bell, these years were full of stress. He had never wanted to fight with anyone, his only wish had been to help people communicate. But now, he had to defend his work in court again and again. The legal battles went on for years. Newspapers called them the telephone wars. Many times, Bell felt tired and discouraged. But he continued to believe in truth and in his own invention. Finally, after many hearings, the courts declared that Alexander Graham Bell was indeed the original inventor of the telephone. His name was cleared, and his reputation grew even greater. By then, the telephone had begun to spread beyond America. In 1878, the first telephone line was built in England. Soon, lines appeared in France, Germany, and Italy. The invention was traveling the world, bringing people closer together in ways no one had imagined possible. Even faraway places like India and Australia began to install telephone networks within a few decades. It was the beginning of a new global age of communication. Bell often said, "The great advantage of the telephone is that it brings people together." But Bell himself never became obsessed with money or fame. He was happy to see others use his invention. He preferred working quietly on new ideas rather than managing business deals. His wife, Mabel, often reminded him to rest, but his mind was always full of curiosity. After a few years, Bell stepped away from the business side of the telephone company and returned to research and teaching. He felt more at home in his workshop than in a boardroom. Even as the telephone became more popular, Bell kept thinking beyond it. He asked himself, what comes next? How else can we use sound, light, and energy to help people? He began experimenting with a new device called the photophone, a machine that could send sound through light instead of wires. Although it was not successful at the time, the idea was far ahead of its age. Today's wireless communication and fiber optics are built on that same principle. Bell also created the audiometer, a device to measure hearing ability, to help doctors and teachers understand deafness better. Through it all, Bell remained kind, humble, and full of wonder. He treated science not just as a tool for invention, but as a way to understand life. He often told his students, "When one door closes, another opens." But we often look so long and so regretfully upon the closed door that we do not see the one which has opened for us. This became one of his most famous quotes, words that continue to inspire people even today. As the telephone spread around the world, it changed the way families lived and businesses worked. People no longer had to wait for letters or telegrams. They could simply pick up the receiver and speak instantly. Farmers called nearby towns for help. Doctors answered emergencies faster. Mothers called their children who lived far away. The telephone became a bridge between hearts. Bell often received letters of thanks from people he had never met. One man wrote, "Mr. Bell, your invention allowed me to hear my son's voice again after 10 years. God bless you." Those simple words meant more to Bell than all the money or awards in the world. By the 1880s, thousands of telephones were in use. By the 1890s, there were hundreds of thousands. The world was talking and listening in ways never imagined before, and in the middle of it all stood the man who had made it possible, a man who never stopped believing in the power of communication, love, and learning. After Alexander Graham Bell's great success with the telephone, most people thought he would spend his life improving it and making money from it. But Bell was not like most inventors. He was not driven by fame or wealth. What truly made him happy was discovery, the joy of finding something new. His heart was full of questions. How does sound move? Can light carry information? Could people someday fly like birds? For Bell, every question was a doorway to new invention. After stepping away from the daily work of the Bell Telephone Company, he built a large house and laboratory in Nova Scotia, Canada, near the ocean. He called it Bainbrig, which means beautiful mountain in Scottish Gaelic. There, he lived with his wife Mabel and their 2 daughters. Mabel had lost her hearing when she was a child, and Bell's love for her was one of the strongest inspirations in his life. He often said that his work was not just for the world, but for her, to make communication easier and more meaningful for everyone. At Bainbrig, Bell filled his days with experiments. His home became a playground for science. The laboratory was full of wires, mirrors, strange metal objects, and even flying machines. One of his earliest new inventions after the telephone was called the photophone. The photophone was a device that could send sound through beams of light instead of wires. Bell believed that one day, people might communicate across great distances using light. He called it his greatest invention, even more wonderful than the telephone. He stood on the roof of his house and aimed a mirror toward a receiver across the yard. When he spoke into the device, his voice caused the mirror to vibrate slightly. The sunlight reflected from the mirror carried those vibrations to the receiver, turning them back into sound. Although the photophone did not become popular in Bell's lifetime, it was too early for that technology. Its principle later became part of the science behind fiber optics and wireless communication. It was another example of how far ahead Bell's imagination truly was. But Bell's curiosity didn't stop with sound and light. He also began studying flight. He was fascinated by the way birds and bats moved through the air. He observed their wings, the shapes of their feathers, and how they caught the wind. If nature can fly, he said, then humans can too. Long before airplanes existed, Bell built large kites made of paper, silk, and wood. He called them tetrahedral kites because they were shaped like pyramids joined together. These kites were not small toys, they were huge, some big enough to lift a person. Bell and his assistants would test them on windy days, running across the fields of Nova Scotia. The people who lived nearby would laugh and cheer as the great kites rose into the sky. In 1907, Bell formed the Aerial Experiment Association, AEA, with a group of young engineers, including a talented man named Glenn Curtis. Their goal was to build a flying machine that could carry a person safely through the air. Under Bell's guidance, the AEA designed and built several early airplanes. In 1909, one of their aircraft, called the Silver Dart, made the first powered flight in Canada. Bell was overjoyed. Although he did not pilot the plane himself, his ideas and leadership made the achievement possible. He had turned his dreams of flight into reality. At the same time, Bell never forgot his early mission, to help those who could not hear. He continued to support schools for the deaf and worked on devices that could measure and improve hearing. He developed an audiometer, a tool still used in modern hearing tests. He also helped train teachers who worked with deaf students. Bell believed that education could give everyone a voice, whether they could hear or not. He once said, "What this world needs is not a better telephone, but a better understanding between people." This gentle philosophy shaped everything he did. In his later years, Bell's laboratory became even more creative. He worked on boats, engines, sound recording, and even medical machines. He was always experimenting, always learning. Visitors often described him as full of life, his eyes bright, his hair untidy, and his pockets filled with strange bits of wire and paper. He would rush from one experiment to another, excited as a child discovering something new. Bell's wife, Mabel, was his greatest supporter. She helped organize his notes and encouraged him to share his discoveries. Together, they welcomed many young inventors and scientists to their home. It became a place of ideas, learning, and friendship. When Bell looked back on his life, he never measured success by money or awards. He measured it by how much good his inventions brought to others. He once told a friend, "The only difference between success and failure is the ability to take action." Those words reflected his whole life story. Even as an older man, Bell remained deeply curious about the natural world. He loved watching the stars, studying plants, and walking by the sea. He believed that curiosity was the secret to happiness. "Don't keep forever on the public road," he once said. "Leave the beaten track occasionally and dive into the woods. Every time you do so, you will be certain to find something you have never seen before." When Bell was in his 70s, he slowed down a little, but his spirit remained young. He continued working until his final days, surrounded by his family and students. He passed away peacefully in 1922, at his beloved home in Nova Scotia. As he lay resting, the telephone lines across America went silent for 1 full minute in his honor. It was the first time the world truly paused to remember the man who had made it possible to speak across distances, to connect hearts and voices in a single, invisible line. Alexander Graham Bell's story was not just about science. It was about connection, curiosity, love, and the endless search for understanding. When Alexander Graham Bell passed away in 1922, the world mourned not just the loss of a great inventor, but of a man whose work had changed humanity forever. In cities and towns across America, telephone lines went silent for 1 full minute. It was a simple but powerful gesture, a world connected by his invention, pausing together in his memory. Bell's voice could no longer be heard, but his dream continued to speak. From the very first call in a small Boston workshop to the millions of conversations happening every day across oceans and continents, Bell's invention had transformed the meaning of communication. But his legacy went far beyond the telephone. Before Bell, people relied on letters that took days, or even weeks, to travel. Messages were slow, and distance felt heavy. After Bell, everything changed. Businesses grew faster. Families stayed in touch. Emergency help arrived sooner. The world became smaller, closer, and more human. By the 1920s, telephone lines stretched across North America and Europe. Within decades, they circled the globe. And in time, Bell's idea of instant communication inspired the creation of radio, television, and later the internet. Every time someone picks up a phone today, or makes a video call, or sends a voice message, they are continuing Bell's dream. He showed the world that connection is not just about technology. It is about understanding, listening, and reaching out. Even though the telephone made him famous, Bell never stopped being a teacher, scientist, and dreamer. He always believed that knowledge should be shared freely. He gave lectures to young students, supported scientific societies, and helped found the National Geographic Society, which still inspires curiosity and discovery today. He often said, "Great discoveries and improvements invariably involve the cooperation of many minds." To Bell, invention was not just about one person's genius, it was about teamwork, imagination, and a desire to serve others. His laboratory in Nova Scotia became a place where young people could experiment, learn, and create. Some of those students later became scientists and inventors themselves, carrying Bell's spirit of discovery into new generations. Those who knew Bell described him as warm, kind, and full of humor. He loved storytelling, playing the piano, and spending time with his family. Even after great success, he remained humble. When people called him the father of the telephone, he would smile gently and say, "It takes many fathers to raise a child." His wife, Mabel, continued his work after his passing, supporting education for the deaf and promoting scientific learning. Their love story, built on patience, respect, and shared dreams, remains one of the most touching in history. Bell's personal life reflected his deepest belief that true communication is not only through sound, but through understanding hearts. Bell once imagined a world where people could see each other while talking, even across great distances. At that time, such an idea sounded impossible. But today, video calls are part of everyday life, proof that Bell's imagination reached far into the future. He also believed in renewable energy, clean water, and scientific education for all. He said, "The day will come when man will not only use the energy of the sun, but will cause it to work for him." Many of his early experiments in light and sound later influenced technologies like fiber optics, solar power, and wireless transmission. Bell never lived to see all of those dreams come true, but his vision guided the people who did. The story of Alexander Graham Bell teaches us more than science. It teaches character, hope, and the power of curiosity. He showed the world that mistakes are not failures, they are steps toward discovery. He showed that kindness and patience can build bridges between hearts, just as wires can carry voices across distances. And he proved that one person, driven by a desire to help others, can change the course of history. Bell's motto in life was simple yet powerful: "What this world needs is more people who specialize in the impossible." Those words continue to inspire inventors, teachers, and dreamers even a century later. Today, every ring of a phone, every call between loved ones, and every online message carries a small echo of Alexander Graham Bell's first experiment, the moment he said, "Mr. Watson, come here, I want to see you." It was more than the birth of a machine. It was the beginning of a new way of being human. Bell's story reminds us that invention begins with imagination, and imagination begins with listening, to the world, to others, and to the quiet voice inside that says, "What if?" And that is why his legacy will never fade. Alexander Graham Bell lived a life filled with love, learning, and endless curiosity. He gave the world a gift that connects people across time and distance, a gift that keeps evolving with every new technology. But above all, his true invention was not the telephone. It was the idea that communication can unite us, that every human voice deserves to be heard, and that discovery is a journey without end. Even today, when we speak to someone far away, we can imagine Bell smiling somewhere, knowing that his dream of connection has become the world's reality. And his echo, soft but eternal, still whispers across the wires and waves of our modern world: talk to one another, learn from one another, stay connected. And so ends the story of Alexander Graham Bell, the man whose dream gave the world a voice. From a small workshop filled with wires and curiosity, came an invention that changed every home, every heart, and every future. He taught us that communication is more than words. It is about understanding, love, and the courage to imagine something new. Bell's story reminds us that one simple idea, born from kindness and curiosity, can travel farther than we ever dream. From the sound of a single voice to the connection of an entire world. Even today, when we make a call, send a message, or hear the voice of someone we love, we are part of his legacy. So remember, every time you speak, share, or listen, you are continuing the dream of Alexander Graham Bell, a world united by communication, by learning, and by the endless power of the human voice. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories from history. Told in simple English, for learners, dreamers, and storytellers everywhere.